But today, Jameson Proctor of Athletics to talk about purpose-built design in the age of AI. He's been building some really, really cool tools. I know Jameson through the Soda family. Great fan of athletics and the work that they do there. And with that, I will shut up and hand it over.
All right. Josh, thanks again for having me. And everybody, thanks for turning up whatever time it is, wherever you are. I'm here and like I said in the chat in balmy Brooklyn, New York. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we'll jump right in. You all are guinea pigs for Figma slides. So if anything gets wonky, my apologies, but I think we've got it going on. Little letterboxing, but I think we'll be all right. So um, before I jump in, I'll give you an overview of the title of today's conversation. I think that we're all riding the wave of generative AI. I'm a huge fan of it. I'm a daily driver. I find it incredibly useful from a sort of thought sparring perspective. I find it extremely useful as a creative sparring partner. But, at the same time, um, I really fundamentally believe, as I'm sure many of us do, that there is still a significant role that purpose-built tools have to play in this sort of current era of communication arts. And so that's sort of the thinking behind the title of this talk. Let's see, there we go. So a little bit about me. I'm not gonna take you through the agenda. We'll just hit it as we go. Um, I, have had uh, an interesting path to where I am today. Today, I'm the CEO and a partner at the Brand Innovation Studio Athletics. But I really started my professional life as a chef. That was largely because I couldn't quite finish an undergraduate degree because I wanted to go drive around in vans with a bunch of dudes playing clubs that nobody came to. And it was kind of hard to do while also finishing that undergraduate degree. I think I have something like 7/8 of a degree in English literature with an emphasis on 20th century poetry. So, not to date myself, but I'm going to do so anyways. Um, I got my first computer back in something like 82, 83. It was a hand-me-down Apple II Plus that I got from my grandfather. He was an engineer, and I had the great fortune of when he upgraded to a 2E, I got that 2 Plus. So I've grown up since I was 11 or 12 years old, with some form of technology near at hand. And that's really where that sort of through line for me professionally came from. I won't talk too much about athletics, but there's a couple of things that I think that are germane about the way in which we think about ourselves to today's conversations. Um, you know, we we like to say that we make brands that get to work, and we do that by helping our clients design their place in the world. Um, as you can kind of see from the sticker sheet, we are what we call category and scale agnostic. The thing that we love about that is it really allows for cross-pollination in the way we think and what we make. Um, we believe that brands get to work when they're purposeful, original, and useful. And this isn't just elevator pitch. I think that idea of purpose, originality, and utility, again, is germane to some of the tools that we've been building over the course of the past 5 years. So we're going to take a little bit of a meandering path through here. I'm going to go super fast through these things so that we can actually look at some tools and get our hands on some tools. But I do want to take a moment to talk about the foundations of our practice, especially as it pertains to generative design. Um, I think throughout history, we all know that artists have repurposed materials, and in the modern era, they've repurposed electronics and information technology to create. That can be everything from Loie Fuller's innovative use of lighting at the turn of the 20th century to William S. Burroughs and Byron Geisen exploring the malleability of documents through their cut-up method. This is a plate from their book, The Third Mind. Or someone like Edgar Varese, who was a classical composer who used samples and tape splicing and what he called musique concrete. Um, as technology advanced, so did the degree of repurposing and interaction. I mean, I don't know that nylon hosiery are necessarily an emerging technology, but one of the things that I do love about Sungan Nguti's work was this idea of repurposing everyday items and then inviting visitors to interact with them in ways that change the form of her sculptures. Um, Nam June Paik pushed the boundaries of repurposing by using technologies like closed circuit televisions in his sculptures. This is an incredible sculpture called Untitled that was recently restored by the MoMA. It's a player piano with a number of CCTV cameras that really get into the internals of its machinations. Pauline Oliveras was a true pioneer of generative art in her work with modular synthesizers. It's really a place where technology and interaction and this idea of working within the constraints of those technologies to create work was born. And, I mean, there's so many other folks that I'm not going to touch on. I will kind of fast forward to the modern era. And as we find ourselves on this exponential need, um, what we're seeing is technologies like AI, data, robotics, spatial recognition, motion tracking, and so many other emerging technologies playing significant roles in generative art. And, I think that one of the reasons that I want to touch on this timeline, this through line, is it's foundational to the way in which we think about the intersection of design and technology and the role that it plays in creating those purposeful, original, and useful identities. Real quick about me. I already dated myself. In the 80s, I became very fascinated on and focused on the intersection of creativity and technology. I did a lot of tinkering and playing, writing graphics demos, writing generative code and using things like music trackers on the Commodore 64 to create sound. And those, you know, those early experiences have stuck with me throughout my professional life and my career. If we fast forward to the internet, Flash, Web 2.0, career changes, Web 3.0, et cetera, and so forth. I still find myself focusing on how code and hardware can impose constraint, foster intentionality, and create modular systems that spark new ideas. You might hear my radiator in the background. It's from a video I took of this patch on my modular synthesizer on the bottom left. And I'll tie all of this together as we kind of go along. So, one of the things that we saw um, in the what I like to call the 2000 teens, as the web became more capable, we saw that agencies, studios, and individuals started to bring these concepts into their commercial practices. Now, there are far too many amazing projects to call out in the time that we have today. But these are a few things that really caught our attention at athletics. On the top left, we have the New York Public Library Generative Book Cover Project, where they used the language processing to create these generative covers for all of these open source books that had no covers, and really made them more accessible in digital. Uh, on the bottom left, that is the synthesizer. That's a hard thing to say. That Collins and Dynama designed for the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. If you've never played around with it, it's still up and around. I would recommend Googling synthesizer and playing around with it. And on the right there, that's just a very, very sort of basic exhibit from Dia Studio's Generative Identity for Squarespace. And one of the really amazing things that Dia did alongside that generative identity is they created a web-based tool that you could interact with all of the elements of that identity and understand how the system fit together and came to life. And we started to see, like I said, we started to see these experiences out in the wild, and we said, hey, how do we build something similar? We used to joke around and say, hey, we're going to build an art machine. We really had no idea what that was, how we were going to do it, what the point was going to be, whether anybody actually would be interested. And so, what happened around? Oh, I'm going to skip that slide for a second because there's some sound. So I'll come back to it. What happened around 2020 in the depths of the pandemic is that Square, the payments company, came to us, and they were at the tail end of a global rebrand. And their brand team said, hey, we've got a lovely new identity. It's static. There are no motion principles, and we have so much surface area that requires motion. Um, Out of home, banners, the product itself. And so we started with the creative exercise and really work together to say, hey, what does motion look like for Square? Based on they had a prevailing concept of open, um, open systems, open for business. Really important, right, in 2020. And so we developed those motion ideals. That led to us developing 16 really well-defined motion principles. Um, and in the process of doing that, they said, well, the real challenge here is we've got two people on our global brand team that are proficient in After Effects, And they're actually spending most of their time in Celtra, pumping out banner ads. So while we have now a lovely extension of our identity, we don't really have a way to put it out there in the world. And so, well, hey, what if we prototype a tool, right? So we've got the art machine in our mind, and we see an opportunity to actually get it out there. And so we do a lot of work with React, and there is a platform in React called Storybook, which is really good for developing and sharing React components. And it's parameterized. So once you get your components in there, there are tons of knobs and levers and sliders and fields that you can expose and interact with to modify those components. So we prototyped one developer, very, very talented React developer, but single person in our studio, built this prototype on Storybook. They loved it. And so we ended up building a platform for them called Otto, OTTO. And for those of you in the agency business, we unfortunately sold that as a work for hire. And we had to give the code and the name and the copyrights and everything to Square. And so you can kind of see here on the top left, you can see Otto. Man, I wish I could turn this volume down. Is that too loud on y'all's end? Or are you okay? All right, good. I'll get to that tool in a second. Over to the right, next to the Otto interface, you'll see some of the outputs. We then had the opportunity during a global rebrand of Citrix to build a sound tool, which you see here on the bottom left. It's kind of based on a piece of hardware by the company Korg called the Chaos Pad, which is a fun sort of musical gizmo. We worked with a musician from Warp Records in the UK, original music, all generative, all ownable by Citrix, can't make a bad track. That was a fun one. And then over here on the right is a tool built on processing that we developed for IBM for their Tech Exchange conference, where we're able to take all of those really great IBM glyphs and produce a set of static and motion graphics. I'm going to flip over so we don't have to listen to that somewhat incomplete loop. And so that's how our process evolved from really thinking about where we came from as individuals and the creative influences that we're driving our own individual creative processes and practices to seeing things that we were really inspired by in commercial communications arts, to actually having a chance to start building those things. Now, like I said, not having done this before, we gave the keys to Otto to Square, lock, stock, and barrel. And so we said, well, we've got to do this again. And so what we did is we developed a tool called Sesame, which I'll demo here in a couple of minutes. But before I do, I want to take a moment just to kind of talk through where, how this comes together, what the point of all this is, and where we see a tool like Sesame fitting into the creative practice. I think that as you can tell from this conversation, from this talk, we're real believers in the importance and the power of the creative process. And that's a process that is messy, is chaotic and should be. We really need, I think now more than ever, as we think about all of the platforms, we think about the uh, the adoption and the rate of growth with generative AI. We really need to make space for people interacting with one another and exploring creative possibilities and futures and ideas. But once that happens, um, and this is especially pertinent in a commercial practice, we have to think about how we can take those great ideas and put them into the hands of our clients and partners in a way where they can continue to use them. We all often work with clients that don't have the capabilities, the ongoing budgets, or any number of the required factors to kind of continue to create. And so we've really positioned Sesame as the next point in that process. We've got great ideas. We've developed a set of motion principles. We understand, where it is we want to allow those to be modified, to be tweaked. Um, those become components in the system. Those components, because they are motion assets, they're expressed over a timeline. Um, we know that this is nothing new, but we know that we have to be very, very cognizant of the context in which what we create exists. We have to think about dimensionality. We have to think about format. We have to think about frame rate so that these assets can go out there in the world and do the work that they need to do. But the creative process doesn't stop there. We still need the ability to review work. We still need the ability to experiment, to ideate, to collaborate. And so that loop is built into a tool like this. And the lovely thing is once you get through those loops, it's very straightforward to deliver those assets. So I'm gonna I'm going to switch my screen share, and I'm going to bring up our production instance of Sesame first and kind of take you through it so it's less abstract. This diagram, by the way, I worked with one of our young designers. I gave him the liner notes from the 70s Brian Eno record, Discrete Music, that shows a diagram of sort of the tape loop system that um, Eno devised to make that record. And I said, hey, do something similar for Sesame. And I think he did a really great job. Josh, I don't know if there's anything you want to jump in with while I'm switching screen share.
No, no, no. This is all very cool so far. I'm totally digging this.
All right, let's.
Oh, I would just note, we'll have a whole Q&A after this stuff. So like ready your
Yeah,
questions. We'll just drop in the chat and I'll moderate. But yeah, let's look at Sesame.
yeah, I'll talk at you guys. I promise for no more than about 5 more minutes, and then I'll drop a link into the chat. You can play around, and then let's spend the rest of the time together, just having a conversation. I appreciate you hanging out and listening. All right, let's do this. I think I got it. Yep. All right, you guys are seeing what I'm seeing. All right, so here's the platform itself. We recently, I was talking to Josh about this before we got started. We recently did a identity refresh for ourselves. Again, if you're in the agency business, don't do it. It is extremely painful and it takes probably 4 times longer than it should. But we're happy with where we got to. So, you know, the core concepts here. First, we kind of start with the idea of components. As we continue to um, refine the platform, I think those will eventually be called templates, which is just a word everybody sort of has a handle on. But I'll kind of just hover over these. You get a little preview of what each one does. And what you're able to do, and I'll play this here in a second. Um, what you're able to do is you're able to sequence these components like you would, um, those of you who used to use Flash or those of you who use After Effects, in a similar fashion. We've got our timeline here below. So I'll just hit play real quick and just show you, what we have here. Again, this is just sort of a flyover of some of the assets that we developed for ourselves in the course of our identity refresh. Going back to, that idea in um, in Storybook of having those parameters, what you're able to do is you're able to get instant feedback here. But there's some constraints, some governance baked into this. And Josh, by the way, that display typeface is feature deck. I should have known that because I look at this all the time. So, um, given our guidelines, we just have a couple of weights of feature deck. We can, switch it over to, I always pronounce this wrong. I believe it's zone. But, we can switch it over to our face, our body face. We're also able, this is based on a type ramp. So we basically have increments of our type ramp built in. And, there's instant feedback in the application. So I just changed there to the, I can drop it back in. If I go and I look at a different component, let me move the timeline up. Um, this is a piece where, basically we've got a mask that we bring in and a background video. And, we're able to combine those things again to bring our logo mark and some of our cape roll in here in a way that is very much on brand for athletics. You can drag and drop these things. And you can, you don't want that when you take it right out. All the creature comforts that we would expect from a modern application. But, if just looking at sort of some of the stuff I'm showing here, if you are not a career creative, if you don't have, proficiency on the Creative Cloud suite or whatever tools you might use, you can see that by bringing those ideas of constraint and intentionality into the tool, we're able to, in some ways, democratize design inside of organizations. That was one of the things that we really tried to do for Square, was, hey, how can we provide license to teams that didn't necessarily always have license to create? And there's that concept of democratizing design. There's obviously efficiencies built into this. It certainly shortens that length of string of, I'm not a career creative and I see this thing and I'm going to tell you about it, and I'm only going to know it till I see it. Now, like I said, we'll kind of pop back over here. We have to be context aware. We have to think about where our assets are actually going to show up. So, it's going to be actually really difficult to see on that asset because it's a black background. Let's try this one here. So you can see that, the canvas is immediately responsive. So you're able to set the dimensionality of your assets in real time. So if you need to put something on Instagram stories, or if you need a 16:9 for a hero image, it's really, I like to think of it as on demand. I'm not resizing things. I'm not having to make adjustments. But if I do need to go in and adjust type based on those changes, again, we've got those type ramps and things like built in. And then, what you're able to do from there is you're able to render static or motion assets. So um, you could always freeze the timeline on a frame that you liked and render a still frame as a PNG file. Or you can render as anything from, let me get down to 10, 12 frame per second up to 60 frame per second, MP4, WebM, or GIF. And we've brought in other formats as well. We've done ProRes video. We've even explored exporting these as code so that you could take the component and bring it into an experience. So that's a little overview of the platform. And, it's, let me pop back over here. And then, again, as you would expect in sort of any modern platform, we have, a set of collections that we can grant permissions to, et cetera, and all of that good stuff. Now, I'm going to finish this up in 2 minutes. All right, let's do it. So here's something that we built just as a promo for this talk. My creative technologist, Richard Lehman, built this over the course of the past week. And this might get a little choppy on Zoom because of the particle effect, but trust me, it's generally nice and smooth. And one of the fun things about this, and this is what I'll provide everybody access to, I'll drop the link into chat here in a second. One of the things that we did here is, and this is a shout out to our friends at Adobe for making this happen, but we start to bring in AI, generative AI here. So if I pop over, let's go to edit. Let's pop into this component. And let's X this out. Let's choose an asset. We're working with the Adobe Firefly Services API. I've got a reference image because the way this sort of particle effect works, we really want a silhouette. So, I might pop in here. We'll see. Let's try. I wrote him on the whiteboard, so I didn't forget him while I was talking. Let's try a regular concentric circles and see if we get anything. Try the prompt. It's thinking. That's pretty regular, but we'll let it stand. What we can do is we can take the generated image, we can bring it in, and you can see that it immediately applies that particle effect. You can kind of see it happening there. The reason that we did this is, again, we're huge proponents and fans of generative AI, but we view it as, an arrow in the quiver or a tool in the toolbox. And we still want to bring those concepts of constraint, intentionality, purposeful generative design, and be able to layer those on the surface so that what we get is really unique and original to us. So I'm going to stop there. I'm going to drop this link in. The way this demo of Sesame works, it's unique to you in your browser, so you can go in, you can clear out the timeline, you can drop whatever you want in there. and it won't impact anybody else that's playing around with the application. All right. That took me
Game
3 minutes, not two. I'm sorry, Josh.
No, that was brilliant. I love it. I love it. I mean, it's super, super inspiring. So, as if people have questions, drop them in the chat. I'll ask your questions. Like, let me know if you want me to have you ask or if I should ask for you. But Jameson, I got questions too.
All right.
Um, so, it's so interesting to me because like you came up through Flash and all those. Were you an ActionScript programmer?
Yeah.
Okay, so you did the
I went from, one of the things I did early on is I tried to figure out how I could do some of the stuff I was doing in 6502 assembly and Apple Basic in Flash,
yeah, yeah.
wasn't, on the if you cracked open the application, wasn't really possible, but you had to really get into ActionScript to make it happen.
And did you get into it? Were you an AS2, AS3 programmer? Did you do it?
I did. And I mean, partially because you had to, but I think I started playing with it before I started using it professionally. I think I was still probably um, in the kitchen when I really started getting into it and was really focused much more on experiments. But
Yeah.
again, that experimentation allowed me to kind of jump right in once I had an opportunity to do commercial work with Flash.
I love it. I love it. I was a Flash designer developer, and then but when it kind of died, and then like it went to like all that standards based stuff, it just like I feel like I lost the thread to creative technology for a hot minute.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, going from Flash to semantic HTML felt
So
like
boring.
having,
So
was it the
boring.
ice bucket challenge or something like that?
Yeah, 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 yeah. It was like a very dark period of time. I mean, we were doing flash touch screens to keep ourselves warm in the winter. But yeah, we have some questions here. Laura, you had a question. Do you want to ask do you want to ask?
Yes, sorry. Yeah, I was wondering, thank you for sharing, by the way. I love the system. Was this Sesame sort of inspired by the way After Effects used to be able to make these like Mogurt templates for editors to essentially like customize things on the fly? Seeing as how complicated After Effects is for most people not familiar with it. Uh, and an additional question was, and I think it's been asked by someone else as well, do you plan on integrating sort of Gen AI capabilities into it?
Yeah. So the short answer to your first question is yes.
Yeah.
And again, I think that for us, one of the major impetuses was to be able to get something out into the world for a client organization that was as refined as what might be produced in After Effects, but not require the skill set to do so. And going back to that story um, with Square, and even prior to that, with our, we didn't just start doing motion design at that point. Um, but going back to that story of Square, again, even with those folks on their team that did have tool mastery, they didn't have bandwidth because they were always just working out of a backlog. Now, with Gen AI, there towards the end, I gave you a very, very basic example using Adobe Firefly. If you play around with the tool, um, you can remove that reference image so that you can see what else you can generate and how the particle draping works on top of it. One of the things that we've really been thinking about as well, though, is um, and we've done some initial experimentation with is prompt co-piloting on top of the application itself. So you might still have the same degree of constraint that you see in this parameterized approach, but you would bring what has now become a very familiar interface to most people, which is sort of, text to image or text to asset. So that's one thing we're thinking about. And there's another experiment that we've been doing with the AI platform Jasper, because we do a considerable amount of brand voice work, and that's another thing where we run into constraint after our work ends, and we kind of hand it over to our clients. How do they ensure the fidelity of the messaging? Um, I still think personally that platforms like that have a little bit of a ways to go. But I think that as they continue to improve, which, we all know, right? That's, what is it? The AI you use today is the worst AI you're ever going to use. Um, we're well poised to bring copy generation into the platform as well.
All right,
Thank
excellent.
you.
Sam had sort of a follow-up question on that.
I do. I did. My apologies. I'm not familiar with the Adobe Firefly system, but I've messed around with a number of text to image and image to image tool sets. Are you not, when you're generating imagery, you're not actually doing a call to an LLM outside? And if you are, is there any cost associated with that?
When I did that thing where I tried to generate the irregular concentric circles at
Yep.
the end, it is making a call to um, the Firefly text to image platform. They have what they call the Firefly Services API that they've developed. Um, there is a cost associated with that.
Margaret Rivera had a question.
Hi, thank you so much. My brain is spinning with the possibilities, so thank you for that.
Hey.
I noticed that you are very much emphasizing scale agnostic for businesses. So I'm wondering, as far as like being deliberate and intentional with storylining and really encompassing an identity for these companies at any scale, I can imagine smaller firms or smaller businesses maybe needing a little bit more coaching around what would work for what they're trying to communicate. So is
Mhm.
there I guess I'm interested in your business structure. Is there an opportunity for that consulting to happen prior to being introduced to this platform? Or like, how would you imagine this getting integrated so that way they can really feel comfortable that the tools that they're directed towards is really the launching point, and of course they can take it from there.
Yeah, that's a great question, and as you would imagine, a very complex and complicated question. I think, one of the things, and we recently just had um, a conversation with a small gallery that is just launching. I think we're launching their site today. Um, and there was an initial conversation because they, being a gallery, they have ongoing communications needs. Each time they have a new artist on exhibition, and in that particular instance, where we kind of netted out was onboarding them onto a tool like this didn't really make sense for them, and it wasn't a financial concern because we've priced this really competitively. I mean, what we really do is brand strategy and brand identity. That is the core focus of our practice. We're not a software company, right? This is more in service of making sure people can use that work in a way that works well for their business. What we did with that particular client is we implemented um, those communication needs in the tools, and we'll produce them for them on a periodic basis. As and there's the great thing about that is there's a mutual benefit to that, right? There's an efficiency benefit on our side because we're not going from 0 to 1. And we're able, as a result, to extend the cost benefit to the client. So that's the way we've been handling it so far.
All right. Roger has a question. I'm going to jump in the middle of this and ask my question. Um, it's pretty interesting. I'm curious how much of Sesame was actually written with AI as well, like as a co-pilot, and and how much of the efficiencies of being able to write with AI maybe even make it possible to produce software for a client.
I think that, well, let's go back to Otto, and that'll let us solve
Yeah, yeah.
the question as well. Otto was handwritten. I think
Mhm.
it was before we were seeing wide adoption with GitHub Copilot.
Right, right, right.
Now our creative technology team are diehard believers in Copilot. I would say that um, from what I'm able to glean from their usage, I don't write code on a regular basis anymore in that way. Um, they really appreciate it from um, a scaffolding perspective. It really allows them, and that's sort of the promise that we've all heard from automation and artificial intelligence over the past 5 to 10 years, right? We're gonna maybe less so with Gen AI, but if we go back to automation, right? We're gonna take that rote work. We're going to take that off of your plate so you can focus on the strategic and creative work that has value and meaning. And I think that that's largely the way they use it. I would assume they use it to figure out a particularly tricky issue every once in a while as well.
Nice, nice. Um, Roger, did that answer your question? Do you want to?
Roger, I can go further there real quick too. I think that,
Yeah.
you know,
Go.
one of the things, you know, learning from that experience of Square and selling that tool and having to build from the ground up, that we learned, Square was Otto was built to be extremely lightweight. The tool itself still really is a browser-based application. So it's extremely portable. You're not worried about putting load on servers and really having to get into some of that DevOps and infrastructure management. But Square was so lightweight that it didn't really have a user system. It didn't have a persistent um, asset store. It wasn't pluggable, meaning that it wasn't designed from the ground up to integrate with APIs. And so when we went back to the drawing board, we started to try to look up at the horizon and say, hey, where could this thing go? And so as a result, now we have a platform that can plug into a number of digital asset management systems, can implement single sign-on and federated login, can integrate with making calls to LLMs to generate assets, et cetera. So that was a big part. It was, I mean, you always want to do it right, but as it begin as you intend to proceed. But obviously, sometimes when you're working against aggressive deadlines, you don't actually do that work. So we had the opportunity to do that when we started over.
All right, awesome. Nikki, you had a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Jameson can share a little bit more about the recent experience in updating Athletics' own identity, stories, rants, frustrations, any advice you would give to other studios perhaps going through the same.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I was, I kind of joked about it, right? It said, don't do it yourself. But I think that at the end of the day, if there is, which there usually is, right? There's a reason you're doing it. Often there's a positioning component to it. It's not just, we're not just decorating the surfaces of our identity. We're trying to truly identify who we are and communicate that to the market. And so we really had to kind of go deep there, and think about what we do best, try to get away from commodified messaging, right? Because we work at the intersection of strategy, design, and technology, which in 2025 is table stakes. That might have been a really compelling message 15 years ago. And so, despite me joking around about not doing it yourself, I think you have to give it the time and the space that you need to give it, and you need to make sure that you're bringing, you're pitching a big tent, and you're bringing all of the people that you need to bring to the table in, so that when you get to the end of it, if you're going to invest the time and the effort, you get to a place that you feel very good about.
All right, awesome. All right, well, we're almost at time. I'm going to let Beth ask the final question. Then, Jameson, after that, I'm going to let you sign it off. So you tell people in this community what you want from them, moving forward. So Beth, why don't you ask your question, and
Oh, yeah.
Jameson, you can sign off after that.
Okay, great. Thanks so much. Yeah, no, I was just asking about sort of your business model and the developing the software, and whether you did or thought about creating a separate company when you developed the software, as kind of, you said you're not a tech company, but you kind of are, because you're really developing a tech product, and how you separate the tech product from your studio, or if
Yep.
you just kept ownership, and what your thinking was. And then also whether your licensing plans are, or plan is aimed at, large brands, or are there layers kind of like Canva that are more affordable for, the folks like, influencers and emerging performing artists and whatnot, who really their livelihoods in the small businesses are based on just generating lots of content and making sure it looks good. So they don't have to spend their whole lives just creating social media content.
Yeah.
Because it seems like an incredibly valuable tool for that crowd. I work a lot with folks in that sphere, and it's just a never-ending nightmare for so much talent out there.
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, I try to create content. I don't do it as much as I should, and it is extremely time consuming. So to answer your question as succinctly as I can, the answer is not yet. But the advice that I've gotten from everyone I know who's done something similar is that, once you reach a certain inflection point, if you don't do so, you're setting yourself up for some real challenges moving forward. We're fortunate enough to have a really great director of creative operations who's worked at some agencies of scale, and he does a really good job making sure that the work is properly attributed to the right cost center, right? We have a budget for research and development, and we book all of this work against it, and we evaluate those on a monthly basis. But at a certain point, especially as we have more adoption, the tool will require full-time resources. And at that point, we don't want to be competing with each other for those resources. To answer your question about licensing, one of the things I'm thinking about doing in the next week or two is putting out a, basically a wait list sort of situation, so that there's an email list and we can talk about how the product is progressing. I have structured the licensing to have individual, team, and enterprise tiers. And I'm really basing the pricing on what we know people are, willing to pay for software, and what feels like is right and fair. I think it's something like $35 a month that we're looking at for individual tiers. And let me sign off here because we're at 3:01. I appreciate everybody making time for this conversation. I appreciate all the questions. I I don't have my information in here, but I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn, Jameson Proctor. Um, Hit me up with any questions to continue the conversation. If you play around the tool, which we're going to kind of leave open for who knows how long, and you make something cool, we'd love to see it. We always delight in that.
All right, Jameson, thank you so much. This was like super, super inspiring. I will follow up with everybody with a link to your LinkedIn and also a link to Sesame. I think this is the dream of Flex, right? Rich internet applications. We're doing it. We made it there.
We're doing it.
We did it. We did it. We made it.
We're almost there. Josh, thank you, man. I really appreciate you having me. It's a
Absolutely.
really
This
good
is a
time.
pleasure. And to everybody, thank you again for joining us. If you feel like just doing a campfire tomorrow, we'll be doing it. And then otherwise, I'll see you again next week or whenever it's convenient for y'all. Jameson, thanks again. Great to see everybody. All right. Have a great one.
Bye now.
Bye, guys.